Thanks for kicking back with us. We'd like to welcome our viewers that are joining us from Barrie, Midland, Georgina, Durham, Orangeville, Kincardine, London, Owen Sound, Guelph, Stratford, Cambridge, Waterloo Region, and of course Brantford and Brant County.
So people that live in poverty often experience things like homelessness, mental illness, and they kind of all can be kind of comorbid together. So we have some excellent guests here.
Yeah, today we're joined by Marc Laferriere. Marc is a college professor, social worker, author, and a city councilor in Brant County.
Becca McLellan is the director of Why Not City Youth Centers, where she works with youth at risk.
So thanks for joining us today, Marc and Becca. Why is poverty so closely linked to mental health?
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Ladies first.
It's good to be here, guys. So one of the things that Marc and I have both seen over the years working, doing a lot of frontline work, is that there's a certain number of basic needs that you just need to have met. Right. And when you don't have stable housing, consistent access to food, you need those. Without those, your stress level's just out of proportion, and it becomes almost impossible to regulate everything else. And so that level of stress for a long period of time, just it puts cracks sometimes in your well-being, and it needs to get addressed as quickly as possible.
Yeah, if you look at it from a really practical point of view, mental health goes across different socioeconomic levels and different groups and all of that, different age demographics. But when you look at the mental health, jumping on what Becca just said, is that there's so much to do with the practicality of poverty. And what I mean by that, I guess, more is the impracticality of poverty. So we know sleep hygiene is really important. Well, I have a hard time sleeping, and I have a nice bed in a warm house. Now imagine I'm not in a warm house. I'm trying to find 2 hours of sleep in the doorway of a bank or a bakery. Police might come at any time. Citizens might come. I might get beat up. I might get assaulted. I'm going to get judged. I'm cold, or I'm too hot. I don't have sleepwear. I'm having issues with my feet and other parts of my body that aren't being rested and relaxed. So that's just one example. But we look at all these impractical issues of poverty, how busy you are if you're poor, trying to survive. Emergency meal programs are all over a geographical location. I listened to all the places that you mentioned that we're broadcasting right now, and this issue exists across those rural and those urban communities and several others. If you have to be an 85-minute walk away for your food, or a 3-hour walk because you don't have access to public transit, well, what does that do, and is it even worth it? On top of the increased risk of violence and instability. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all remember that from high school. If you don't have your basic needs met, then how do you get to the next level? It's very hard. And then safety and security needs, you never have that if you're in abject poverty. And if you are in sort of a moderate poverty, you still have worries about that continually. Like you're just holding on. Physical health is connected to our mental health, and that is connected to poverty as well, unfortunately.
Right. It sounds a lot like if you're not able to get those first initial needs met, it's really hard for you to thrive at any point past that. And I can imagine it would be really hard. I know a lot of the shelters that are open in any spots like that, when you go to receive services, a lot of your possessions that you have, you're not able to bring in. So each day, these people are facing needing to find all of those things that they've collected once again, and either going into a shelter or keeping those things that you've worked hard to collect is really difficult.
Yeah, it can be, just by the way that it's set up, it can be such a disempowering experience because you've already lost so much of your life in terms of the story that you had, the connections that you used to have that are often broken by long-term poverty. And so to be in a position where you just have nothing but the clothes on your back that aren't even your clothes necessarily, like they could just be some you grabbed out of a bin, like you're just, it's bottom of the barrel sometimes. And so to get that climb out of that place, you really need to have all of those steps in place, a place that is safe, a place where you can sleep, people you can depend on, and even just nutrition and sleep is such a huge one.
So if we look at that piece too, like you talked about comorbidity, which is a big word to say at a certain time of the day. But when you look at that piece, you're also looking at some issues there when it comes to addiction and poverty, homelessness. There are some interactions. Now, there are people who are homeless who aren't addicted. There are people who are homeless without mental health. There are people with mental health and addiction who are quite well off. So let's not get that twisted. But when we look at comorbidity, we're looking at things like, okay, so you're addicted to a substance and you have a paraphernalia that you use with that you know is safe and you know is clean. And then you have to hand it in every night at the shelter, or you don't get it back, and sometimes it's confiscated, or you can't bring it in and you can't even lock it up. Well, I've known people even in our community who in the past, before the shelter was 24 hours and before it was fully open, when it was sort of in its soft launch, who decided not to go back because if I'm going to be cold tonight, and yeah, maybe I could die from that level of temperature and issues, but if I'm going to be dope sick tomorrow because I can't use my drugs, then I could die then, or I could be victimized then. So I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And sometimes the systems aren't really looking at that as a whole. I hear people all the time say, in our community we're lucky, and it's true, that we have an emergency meal program pretty much every meal. But again, if they're in all the corners of the city, is that really helpful to the person in the core?
Right, in the middle, yeah.
And on top of that, there are dynamics. I've known people who haven't gone to an emergency meal program because they owe somebody money who's going to be there, or because there's some personal dynamic and they don't want to be seen by somebody who they know is going to abuse them. They don't want to set themselves up for victimization. So there's lots there. Sometimes people make decisions that we might sit there and look at and go, is that a good decision with the time and the resources, the money you have or don't have? But from them, they're making a decision based on the moment and based on the options available to them. And if you found it from their point of view, if you looked at it from their point of view, you'd sometimes be surprised at the good decisions they're making for their own safety and protection that wouldn't appear that way to the rest of us.
Right, and I think it's just the last 5 minutes of having this conversation, there's so many factors that play into somebody that is homeless. And a lot of people just have that they just look at it and say, oh, well, that's just there. They don't think, oh, they just need to get a job.
Yeah.
Right, and that's not realistic. There's so many factors that play into this. Marc, do you want to touch on?
Sure, yeah. We don't have full employability for everybody looking for work right now, who's housed, who has an education. There's an unemployment rate no matter what.
Right.
Now, when you look at somebody who's struggling, and again, we're talking about homelessness a lot because it's a big issue in our community right now, but when we just talk about poverty, even if you're in some form of public housing or inadequate housing, but there's housing, you might be getting your meals, but you're not getting other opportunities potentially. So if you have clothes, Becca talked about the clothes in the bin, but you don't have laundry, so your clothes stink. Right. Who's hiring you? If you have issues with your teeth, and they're green and they're black and they're red and they're bleeding and they're pussing, are you going to be hired at a restaurant? Are you going to be hired at retail? Are you going to be hired in janitorial services? No, right? Because employers are going to look and say, I can't. This isn't going to work for our customers or whatever it might be. So when we talk about the bigger systems, again, I like to always bring it back to the practical or impractical portions of poverty that people don't think about unless you've been there. I've been there in many parts of my life, lucky enough to not be there now, but beyond working in it, I bring my own experience. But it's that piece that you don't think about unless you're in it. And when you're in it, you don't have the resources all the time to advocate for all these changes that would actually be helpful, because you're just trying to survive.
Right, and it's one thing for adults, but for the youth, Becca, that you work with, what are you seeing with them?
So we hear the whole, you should just get a job thing all the time, and that is so viable for people who know what it means to show up on time, who know what consistency looks like, and who know how to handle expectations. But there's a whole population of young people who haven't had those privileges, who haven't necessarily even had adults stay in their house with them, who were neglected and abandoned in so many ways and told that they do not have the capacity to perform. And so when they deeply believe that they don't have what it takes and have been almost trained in the opposite of consistency, employment doesn't work yet. There's a lot of steps that need to build up, from all the way from hygiene to safe and good communication with other people and not being threatened by it.
Right.
So sometimes if someone raises a voice at a young person who's experienced childhood abuse, they're going to respond with, how dare you speak to me this way? I'm either going to run or speak back to you.
That's fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
And freeze is bad too, because you're at work and now you're not functioning, you're not really productive. What happens now?
So when the stress rises and you're getting told how to respond, it doesn't work. Like, they're not at that place yet. So taking those steps to really build up those core skills and those core traits really has to come before employability is even viable.
Yeah, there's an interesting stat on employment and mental health that we should talk about because it's related to this. And that's that the Canadian economy, the Conference Board of Canada did this study in 2017, and they found out that presenteeism and absenteeism due to mental health issues. So presenteeism is when you show up but you're not really there and productive, which can happen. If you have the flu and you're concentrating on not vomiting all day, you're not going to be as productive at work. If you have a serious mental health issue or even a moderate mental health issue and you're focused on maintaining that to the best of your ability, you're not going to be very focused on work. Absenteeism is not showing, right? Those two things cost the Canadian economy $50 billion with a B dollars a year.
Wow.
Right? So we have issues with folks who are employed making wages, and their mental health is really affecting the workplace. What's happening with folks who aren't able to be there because of their mental health issues, which are often misunderstood, right? And sometimes connected to poverty as well. And then it keeps them poor and gives them less access to opportunities and sort of mainstream opportunities.
Right, and what, like for the viewers that are watching, what are things that they can do, or what's the message that they need to understand to be able to help with what's going on in our community?
I've seen a huge rise in compassion in our community, and I get the impression that that is broader in Canada as a whole, where people are more patient when it comes to trying to understand the factors that are holding other people back. And so when it comes to mental health, sometimes it is complex and sometimes it's situational, where there's certain tasks, certain situations that are rougher on people and certain ones that are fine. And that compassion and that building up of that fight to understand is really growing, because it's not a matter of all or nothing for people with mental health problems and employment. There are ways to adapt. We can innovate. We can get creative. We can hijack this with duct tape and make it work. There are ways to do it. Right. So when it comes to employers and even just groups of employees as a whole, we can make this work if we just take a little bit more time to understand. And on the larger front, those basic needs things are all pieces of a puzzle, and they're not, one's not necessarily more important than the other. They're all valid. And so I know people who are so passionate about like rescuing puppies, and that is amazing. And someone else who is going to knit hats for babies in the NICU. One's not better than the other. All of it adds up to build security for each other and to build that stability and that sense of community. It's really powerful to just build connectedness and simple help.
It really sounds like there needs to be a solid foundation in order for people to thrive.
Well, actually, we don't really know that, right? Because there are people who have solid foundations and they still are greatly affected by mental health. There are people who are well off beyond our wildest dreams, who have more serious mental health than folks who struggle continually. But it's really tough. The one thing that I think has been really working, though, is the anti-stigma campaigns have been working. Things like this have been working. There are risks with a lot of these anti-stigma campaigns about somebody sharing too much and being kind of more vulnerable, especially if you're poor and can be taken advantage of and the rest. But I think it is working, and I see in my classrooms, I see students who casually will say, as part of conversation, my psychologist told me once, right, where 10 years ago, that would not have happened in a classroom.
The shame is disintegrating.
Yeah, it's still there, but people do understand how we should be treating things like this more like physical health issues. However, there's still issues around socioeconomics and race and gender that perplex folks. So people, mental health is involved in all of those things as well, and poverty and socioeconomic status is involved in all those things. In Canada, if you're a white guy, you're going to generally make more money than a white woman. If you're a racialized guy, you're going to make less money than the white woman generally, but more money than a racialized woman. If you're an Indigenous man, you're going to make less money than the racialized woman, and if you're an Indigenous woman, you're going to make even less. And the stats have borne this out over decades. So those are factors at play. When we were talking about the homelessness issues that are affecting people here, 70 to 85% of the folks who were in the tent city were Indigenous, right? Or at least in part. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because of systemic issues mixed in with interpersonal. There's internal issues that we have, and we can all have them, but there's external. Here's the example I always use. And it's a bit of an interesting example, so bear with me. If I'm out drinking one night, I'm likely doing so with a bunch of friends. So let's say I'm in downtown Brantford or any of the other 14 areas we're in right now, and it's late and I can't get into any place, there's lineups, I really have to pee. Well, I might go in an alley and I might urinate, and the cook comes out and the cook says, "Hey, what are you doing? Get out of there!" And I go, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and I'm able to communicate, I'm able to talk. I'm dressed something like this. I'm not likely going to get the cops called on me. I might offer the person some money, like, "Hey, here's $20. I'm so sorry. What can I do? I just really had to go." Right? It's kind of a silly example, but I probably talk my way to that. If the police come, I might even be able to talk my way out of that, right? I get a fine or a citation, a ticket, but I'm probably not getting arrested. I'm definitely not hitting the police officer. I might know him because of where I teach and what I do for a living, right? So I have options there, even in a situation like that. Now I'm a homeless person with mental health issues, and I go pee in the alleyway. The chef comes out, he says something to me, I say something back to him. It's not as nice, it's not as communicative. Right? And then on top of that, the cops are called. I have issues with the cops. I have some warrants because I missed some court appointments because I don't have an alarm clock and a calendar, and I have other issues and things I needed to deal with. Now he's threatening to arrest me. He doesn't talk to me the way I think I should be talked to. I have maybe some paranoia, other things. I get a little aggressive. Aggressive turns into a push. I'm now arrested. I now have a charge. I'm now institutionalized in some way, shape, or form. And that's a real example. That's something that happens every day all over this country, and I've seen it. And I'm not blaming the cops. I train police officers. What I'm saying is it's a lot more complex, and there are a lot less ways. Even something simple like that can turn into a bad thing for me than it could for me if I was, on the system and homeless. And we have to look at that as a systemic issue. What is that? And police are doing really good work with these calls. They're getting more training. We're having these MCART and COAST programs that are doing really good work, helping with that. But police are seeing more mental health calls than they've ever seen. And there's an element of that that's also mixed in with poverty.
Right now, and so that's a very, very, like you said, it's a systemic issue. Mm-hmm. And so is it all of those little, those little things of individuals knitting hats for the NICU and all of those building up to turn it, like change the tide in what's going on and changing that?
We've seen that with the Stigma and the anti-Stigma campaigns, but I mean, you see it at Why Not all the time. We actually met at Why Not when we were younger and cooler.
It was almost 10 years ago.
I know
Maybe it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so a lot of it comes down to connectivity and dignity too. Mm-hmm. So when you start kids off right, sometimes that means equipping parents and the child at the same time. So the mom supporting moms programs and the Facebook groups even that build that sense of and break that sense of isolation, actually. And the same programs that add some extra supports and put more safe adults in that kid's life. Those things at the same time are simultaneously shifting their trajectories away from something that could have turned more ugly. And every piece of it comes together. And it is complicated, but the solution is simpler. It's that humanity and bringing that humanity and sense of dignity, that compassion back into conversations. Earlier this year in Brantford, we had an encampment that was torn up, and I was there that day. I just couldn't help but show up, even though I hadn't been that involved prior. But
me both.
There was yeah, that's right. There was a guy who had just painstakingly built this home for himself out of skids and tarps. It was actually really impressive, far better than any fort I had ever built. And he had far fewer resources, and it was dripping because the ice was melting. It was just freezing. But he had a choice between a skid shack that he had built for himself and the dignity that he had there, and a shelter where he would have to give up all of his possessions and almost all of his autonomy. And the choice was dignity. Dignity came first. And it was, it was a crazy thing to watch, but it mattered so much to him, and things progressed that day. But I think that bringing dignity even into frontline services more and more is so helpful, where names matter more than intake forms.
Right.
Even just
And showing up.
yeah,
And showing up and having some consistency in that you're a
Absolutely.
trusted person. You know, when you do, I did 2 years, I think, at Why Not, and
Yeah.
some of it was just playing foosball with kids until they're ready to connect. It's just serving hot dogs until they're ready. And we have the same issue we need to realize with people who are living with addiction and mental health, and people who won't engage in the systems because the systems have hurt them in the past. Understanding why that is. So I agree totally with the connection piece and the empathy piece, but it has to have two other pieces, in my opinion. It needs to have some understanding of what the barriers do to people, and also some either personal or political will to change some of those barriers. So, you know, when you look at connection and a lack of it is affecting people all across the social spectrum, right? It's affecting people who generally have not been affected by a lack of connection, right? You're seeing 40-plus-year-old men kill themselves with more regularity than many, many other times because of a lack of connection. You're seeing drug and addiction issues bubbling up because of a lack of connection. And, you know, you bring up the Facebook groups, and sometimes it's going to be really good and really helpful, but if you can read, if you do have internet access. So think of all the ways that we don't feel connected, even if you're in a mainstream part of society. Now, think of all the barriers that might occur if you're not, right? Barriers to access to that, to feeling less connected, and how that'll exacerbate your mental health with all the practical stuff we talked about too.
Right.
I've got this one scenario where an 18-year-old guy came to me for help, and he said, I shot myself in the hand this week, and it's not looking so good. And I was like, you need to go to the hospital, buddy. And he said, no, I don't have a health card, and I hate them because they always kick me out because I get mad, and then they get afraid, and security comes. And so he's got this long history there, not to mention an identification barrier. But then, in addition, he asked me to Google the problem. He said, like, please research this for me. I don't know how tetanus works. He couldn't read. He was at a grade 1-2 reading level at 18. It was a barrier.
The barrier to employment, housing, et cetera,
Absolutely.
filling out a form, right? So,
Yeah, really, it just comes down to the people that are, whether it's the viewers, whether it's first responders, whether it's anybody, it's just taking the time to understand where people are coming from in any.
To think about it differently, to think about it practically, to use information like that you're getting here, but also talk to people, you know, talk to that guy in the corner with the sign if you can, if it's safe. In your workplaces, bring up some of these issues, or see if you can go volunteer in places like some of the meal programs, et cetera.
Right. Well, thank you both very much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time.
No problem.
And viewers, thank you for kicking back with us. We'll be right back while Aidan interviews Front Door. Thank you.
Thanks for kicking back with us today. I'm joined with Bianca Prince from Front Door Access to Child and Youth Services. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what Front Door does.
So as you mentioned, we are the access point for child and youth mental health services in Waterloo Region. So Front Door is unique in the sense that it's part of a joint initiative program between the agency Lutherwood and the agency Horizon Family and Community Services. So it's a partnership that houses staff from both agencies under one roof to be able to provide services to children and youth in the region. And actually we are just celebrating our 20th year.
That's awesome.
In this
Congratulations.
partnership. Yeah, thanks.
So what types of youth cross paths with you guys?
So anyone really. You definitely don't have to have a diagnosed mental health to be involved with us or to seek support from us. We are there to be able to support any youth or parent in the region. Just in general, right? Life can be difficult, many challenges, many stressors, and we're there to be able to talk through that and look at helping to try and come up with a plan or point you in the best direction to get some support.
That's awesome. So you have services for youth ages 0 to 18.
Right.
What kinds of services are available?
So we have many different services. We have some intensive in-home services that we offer, where a worker can actually go into the home and work with parents and children on different things that they might be struggling with or would like to improve or learn to do differently or better. We do have day treatment, which is school-based, and we have residential treatment services. So a real variety of services and supports that we offer.
That's awesome. Very good. So at the front door, what can a youth expect when they go there?
So the main access point for us is our quick access service. So we have various locations throughout Waterloo Region. It is a free service. It's confidential. We definitely strive and aim to provide a safe and judgment-free space where anyone can come. And some locations are by appointment. Some locations are just strictly a walk-in, so they don't require an appointment. You're able to just come whenever you feel like you're ready, right? So you come on in and you're able to sit down and have a conversation and a session with one of our clinicians to talk about anything that you're wanting to talk about, whether that's struggles that you're having, if you're just looking for some direction or resources or supports. You have that conversation with the clinician, and they're there to, again, to talk and to listen.
Now, almost 1 million Canadians suffer from major depression every year, and the concept of men's health is relatively new. People didn't typically talk about it until very recently.
And one of our goals on Kickback has always been to end the stigma and open up the dialogue on men's mental health. So Joey, we appreciate you being here to share your story and specifically share about recovery.
Absolutely, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about your journey with recovery?
Sure. I mean, like today I'm employed as an addictions counselor, mental health coach. Everything that I've done today, I've been doing this for the last year and a bit.
Right.
Before this, it was living in addiction for 20 years. My whole viewpoint is using my personal experience. So I've had addiction for 20 years. I live with major depression, social anxiety, bulimia, and borderline personality disorder. And like you said, as men, you know, we've been brought up, you know, you don't talk about these things. Don't show emotion, like don't cry.
Right.
Right? And that's like such a barrier to be able to recover.
Yeah, and so with recovery, does that mean that you are fully recovered? Like you're through the program? What does recovery mean to you?
Like my whole platform of Personalized Recognize
Right.
is everyone recovers in their own unique way. My personal view is I couldn't say to myself, I'm recovered from this. This is the destination, just like your search is for happiness, but you can't say, you know, I'm in happiness. It's the journey, right?
Right.
So I can say, like, I don't have desire to use today. I haven't like self-harmed today, but I work on it every day.
Right.
And if I'm not working on it, if I'm recovered, then I don't have to work anymore.
And Personalized Recognize, can you share a little bit about where that came from?
That's that's my platform. That's basically what's saying it's Personalized Recognize. It's recovery for everyone from everything. So it doesn't matter what you're recovering from. You need to like find your own way to recover. So like a lot of people with addictions are going through 12-step programming. And if that works for you, then that's awesome. Like keep rolling with that. For a lot of people, that doesn't work for them, whether it be the God aspect or hitting to meetings or whatever the case is. So maybe there's some people that, you know, jive with cognitive behavior therapy, right? Some people would rather dialectical behavior therapy. My working professionally, I'd rather solution-focused therapy. So whatever it is that you're recovering from, find out what works for you. And then the biggest part of it is recognize. Recognize the work that you're doing. Recognize that you're not where you used to be. Because we're searching for recovery. We want to have happiness, right? If we don't have that tomorrow, we could look and say, you know, that's a failure. I'm not doing this. But we can look and say, I'm further towards it than I was yesterday. Good job.
Right.
Big thing for me is I never had anyone giving me validation, never like telling me I did a good job. So I realized that I have to do it for myself, right? If no one's going to say good job to me, I'm going to recognize myself, right? And that gives me the motivation to keep going for the next day.
I love that. And a big part of your messaging too is embracing it, right?
Right.
And you have it tattooed on your fingers. Do you want to share about what that means to you?
Sure. Like a lot of my tattoos I've gotten in recovery. Embrace it. I don't know wherever. I'll just hold it like this and someone might do something.
Yeah.
So embrace it. I've always wanted knuckle tattoos. And this is, again, it doesn't matter what your trouble is, just embrace it.
Right.
Right? So I have a tumor in this finger, and I could allow that to dictate my life. I could allow that to define me. I could hide it all the time, or I can embrace this and point it out, right? Just like my addiction, just like my eating disorder and my depression. I can embrace these things rather than hiding them from everyone to see. Right?
That's amazing. I think that's such a beautiful message. And for somebody that maybe is currently going through recovery, what would your message be to them?
You're not alone, first of all, right? Everyone, like in my line of work, everyone is like, oh, you don't understand. Well, people do understand. You're not alone. There are a lot of resources. Sometimes the resources are hard to manage. Even at my work at Wayside, we have an 8-week wait period to get into our program right now. So it can be hard for people to like lose that motivation. But in the meantime, there's other resources to have. Like my whole thing, like on my online personality, it's raising that positivity. So I learned about hashtags. I never knew what hashtags were. But you can look for like depression hurts, or you can look for depression ends, right? Search that hashtag, and that's where like your motivation comes from. That's where like, you know, the next movement.
Yeah, it really comes from. And
Yeah.
I think what you mentioned about somebody saying, "Oh, you don't understand," that's where that stigma comes from, where people have been, like specifically men too, have always been told like, don't show feelings, don't show emotion, don't cry, like you said earlier. And that's where that thought of people won't understand or you don't understand comes from, because they've been brought up to think that that's not real.
Absolutely. Like my work as a professional, it's using my life experience. It's being myself, dressing the way I do, talking the way I do, showing my tattoos. It totally builds like a therapeutic alliance. It makes the relatability. So someone can say to one counselor, you know, I'm just coming off like an 8-day crack binge. And I could be like, okay, like I get you. Whereas someone who has educational but not life experience, that might create a barrier for the client or the person trying to, you know, form that relationship and form that trust so that they can talk about all their other underlying issues.
No, where was the turning point for you where you went from being someone who had all these struggles to realizing you wanted to really make an impact in others' lives?
So I've been to inpatient treatment 4 times, and after the first time for addiction, I decided I want to help someone. I was in treatment, I had the glow, everything was going great, I want to help other people. And then it wasn't until my 4th time I went back for depression that I realized that I'm not going to learn any new tools. Excuse me. I've done a lot of inpatient, outpatient, working with professionals. I'm not going to learn anything new. I know these things. It's embracing them, like doing those things that I need for myself. And once I started seeing that progression in myself, once I started being able to say good job to myself, and then share that with other people and bring their they're worth up. My previous job as a restaurant manager, I made a heck of a lot more money than I do now. But it's far and away how much happier I am now. People like saying, Joey, like, I can finally understand this. Like, you've provided so much help, like, I feel heard. That's better than any payday.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, and just the fact that you're able to bring that lived experience into that conversation you're having, to be able to share that you do fully understand where they're coming from, and that they do feel heard, that must make that whole session so much more powerful.
Right? I mean, and it's for the client, the patient that I'm working with. A lot of stuff I've learned in my experience in my life is what not to do. So whether it be from like growing up or like bosses that I've had, it's always been like what not to do. I've worked with a lot of professionals in this industry that just didn't serve me, and I'm like, oh, if it was only this way, it would work for me. And that's the way it works for me. For there's other people who see a dude with like tattoos and like wearing the clothes I do, it's not going to work for them. They need someone that's wearing a shirt and tie,
Right.
right? And that's how it's individualized.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier solutions. Was it solutions-focused therapy?
Solutions-focused therapy. It's the therapy that I prefer. In solution-focused, it's not so much about how you got here, because we know how we got here, but it's about what are we going to do now? What's the next step?
Right.
And to begin every session, it's what's better? It's a simple question. What's better today? Right? And then we can go into, recognizing growth and saying like, this is what I'm doing. Identifying goals. Maybe it's using like some motivational interviewing to try to, get whoever I'm working with to realize that help is possible, that recovery is there. I realize recovery is there, but I have to do this work. It's not going to happen for me. Like Wayside's a 90-day treatment program, and there's no way that coming in for 90 days is going to make you recovered from drugs and alcohol. It's not the case. It's the work that you're going to do afterwards, learning the skills that we're going to teach you, and then practice them in your life every single day when you don't need them, so that when you do need these skills, they're ready and they're available for you. That's solution focused.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you for explaining that.
My pleasure.
And so when you see individuals going through recovery and they're like becoming advocates, do you see, is that like a growing trend?
It's, in my experience, like totally, like a lot of the guys that I work with, they identify like, wow, I really want to be in this field now. I'm getting this feeling of recovery, of being well. And, the guys support each other too, right? So they say something to their peer and it's like, wow, like that's great. There's a lot of people that are who were suffering, who are now like spreading recovery. Again, with social media, like looking for positivity, there's so much out there. There's so much there. You just got to search for the positivity.
Awesome, thank you. And where, so individuals that are watching and that want to hear more of your messaging, where can they find you?
So I have the website. I'm not a computer programmer, so there's hiccups on it and whatever, but personalized-recognize.com. Instagram is probably the most of my content, so at personalized.recognize or something like that.
Right.
Facebook and those kind of social medias as well.
Awesome.
It's out there. Again, search for it. Personalized Recognize.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to quickly touch on is you were saying your appearance and the difference between the way you dress versus someone dressed in a suit and tie. And I really feel like it's not only that, but also sometimes people's personalities just don't click. And sometimes for myself, like I might get along better with someone like you where you're kind of more down to earth, and I wouldn't want to deal with the more professional looking person, where for Ben that might work better. But sometimes also it's just like personalities are slightly different, and
Absolutely.
You have to go with what works best for you. Sometimes your first point of help isn't the one that you end up continuing through with, right?
Right, and when we're developing these skills to teach other people, we're not putting on a shirt and tie. We're not worried about like solution-focused therapy isn't my thing. There's people that developed it and I don't know their names, but it's adapting that and presenting it in a way that is relatable, that works for me. like this is how recovery worked for me, so this is how I present it. When I'm running like groups at Wayside or like community events, I talk casually. Sometimes I swear. Like, it really helps people to feel comfortable, so that they can unburden themselves.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We can definitely see your passion in what you do. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have Kitchen and Greg Horton joining us.
A great passion for science and learning was nurtured at an early age for Dr. Abigail Ortiz.
I was born in Mexico City in a very nice family. My mother is a historian. My father was a biologist. So we've been probably kind of into science for a long time. I went to school in Mexico City. I studied medicine, and then I went on to do my residency in psychiatry.
A top student, she won an award and the attention of Dalhousie University, where she was invited to do postdoctoral work in the field of mood disorder, which she found fascinating.
Well, I've always liked neuroscience, and I thought about doing a PhD right after my medical training, but then I thought that to understand human nature, like to really get into the soul of the patient, you need to know much more about the clinical features of the illnesses.
That appetite for knowledge, combined with expertise in a wide range of science applications, led Dr. Ortiz into a very intriguing field of research, one that incorporates mathematics of all things.
And my main piece of research and my main interest is in mathematical modeling. That means that we want to know particularly how mood is regulated in healthy controls, in patients, and on the relatives of those patients with bipolar disorder. Now that we understand that mathematics can help us to know that the mood differences are subtle but present, we can predict mood episodes. So we want to know that, let's say, someone with bipolar is doing fine, but they start to sleep a little bit less than their normal. They start to talk a bit faster than normal. People are noticing, and although this is not an episode per se, there is a difference. So we want to know, using mathematical tools, that they are going to have an episode and then intervene right there, instead of waiting for them to have a full-blown episode and being admitted to hospital.
A focus on prevention has won Dr. Ortiz widespread praise from colleagues and mentors in her field, as well as international awards and accolades. Such accolades have also made her very much in demand as teacher and mentor, a role she enjoys and comes by naturally.
Teaching is important for me because my parents are teachers, so I think that I have that in my genes or something. I think teaching is part of our legacy. I think teaching not only means just giving the resident or the student something to do. I think it means incorporating them to your team, to your way of thinking, or trying to make them have a different approach on a problem.
Fueled by a love of science that is matched only by her passionate care and commitment to her patients, Dr. Ortiz is clearly driven to succeed. That bodes well for those in her sphere of influence.
I think I have an inner motivation to know, to ask questions, just because I'm curious. I care about the patients a lot. I care about what we can do better, because I think there is always room for improvement. I like challenging myself. I like this feeling of being alive.
Welcome back. We've got Greg Horton back joining us here.
Hey guys.
Greg, it's so great to have you. This year now we have you as a host. Last year we had you as a guest, and same with the previous year. We are so happy to have you joining us.
Well, guys, it's gotten to a point where I'm looking forward to Blue Monday every year. But I mean, that's kind of the point of this, right? Is to destigmatize some of this and give somebody something to look forward to, rather than necessarily something to, be brought down by, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we've had a lot of great guests on sharing some really great content, a lot of really deep stuff, a lot of stuff that can hit close to home.
100%. A lot of people, I'm so impressed with people's ability to share their personal stories here and share their personal experiences in dealing with mental illness and mental health. And this is something that really helps us kick back, right? You know, like kind of giving that, I don't know, that permission that we can talk about these sensitive topics and it not be something that we have to avoid or something that we need to feel shame over, which I think has been a bit of a topic today. People feeling shame about mental illness or their mental health and how to communicate past that or through it, you know?
Yeah, and I find it's amazing to see the individuals that struggle with that and how they, once they do get to a certain point, whether or not it's they're fully like past that or whether it's they're working through the recovery or what, no matter what, but once they're comfortable to share, they want to share in a way that it's because they want to share because they don't want anybody else to go through that.
Yes.
They want to make sure that they know what they felt when they were struggling with it, so they don't want other people to go through that. And I just think that is so, it's incredible to see that.
You know, it's interesting. It really shows the dichotomy here of how like something that can be so draining and have such gravity, like mental illness, can produce something so productive and useful, like this passion and like this inspiration we're seeing from so many of the speakers today. You can really tell people are connected with the message that they're bringing across. This isn't just, you know, here's your pamphlet and, you know, see you later kind of thing. These are people that have been through the trenches, both on the side of the caregiver and the side of the person affected. You know, when I was talking earlier, we were talking about the impact this has past just that core piece, right? Just past that one person who's experiencing the mental illness and how it affects family and friends and how far it goes out, right up to entrepreneurs and business people engaging this, whether it be through their employees or the people that they're serving. It's really interesting. And I think it kind of represents a step forward in a lot of ways. I remember back in the early 2000s, in the early millennium, and in the 90s and stuff, that this conversation was not happening. So the fact that we're bringing something like this to light, I think, is really inspiring some people and helping us kick back a bit, right?
And I think the biggest thing is you don't need the doctor who graduated top of his class to be the one listening to you. You don't need the newest therapy or the best therapy. You just need someone to listen to you, and that's the true reality of it. As far as like everyone here, our hosts, none of us are doctors or therapists or anything, but we have this passion, and I think that's what you need, is to share your passion and
100%.
have those open conversations.
Yeah. Just like mental illness can be somewhat contagious, you know, and when we see mental illness through our society, we can really start to get depressed too, right? On the other side of things, when we see other people succeeding and other people bringing these messages of positivity and healing, we're affected by that too. And so we can create that ripple effect, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, by having these difficult conversations. And you know what, guys, it's not even feeling that difficult anymore, at least. And here we are in front of cameras, in front of everyone in Brantford and stuff like that, talking 100% openly about this kind of stuff. This isn't your typical audience that's here. And so because of that, and getting this concentrated population of quality speakers, quality business people, all of a sudden we're creating something that's a very important message that I think that people need to pick up on, which is we can talk about this. And it doesn't have to be something that you hold in, or you have to be tough and hang in there until magically everything gets better. But something where you can effectively reach out and trust that you're going to get something back to help.
Exactly, and right now we're right around dinner time, so I know that we've had stories in the past of families watching, either whether it be year one or year two, watching in the background, and all of a sudden they're all sitting around the table, and all of a sudden Dad opens up about the fact that he's been struggling with something or has struggled with something, and then he's never talked about it before, and then all of a sudden everybody at the table has this open sense of feeling to be able to share about what they're going through. And I think it's amazing to see how you called it a ripple effect. I've described it as like a snowball.
Right.
The more people that we get involved and have in that snowball, the bigger that gets, the more people that get brought into it, that stigma does go away. And Becca said it earlier, I loved it, it's disintegrating. The stigma is disintegrating. I think that's such a perfect word for that.
I love that. That's exactly what it is. And you know, like, I think what that does is it generates hope. And one of the things that I've seen underlined by so many people here is that message of hope and love, and what that does to actually combat this, right? I think sometimes we kind of look down on hope. You don't want to get your hopes up, right? But in fact, I think that the only reason anybody does anything is because of hope. We hope that it's going to succeed. We hope that we won't have mental illness, right? Through that hope, that's what grants us access to that snowballing effect. Other people who hope, a community of people who have that positive outlook, that desire for momentum, some people who are seeing past the inconvenience of what mental health and mental illness can be, and more about, this is someone I love. This is just something that we do, something as common as giving someone a hug when they walk through the door, a mental health check-in.
Yeah, just listening too. Like sometimes you don't need to provide an answer, and I think a lot of the times people feel that they need to provide that answer back. But a lot of the times it's just listening, just being an ear, and allowing that person to get it up in their head and just allow. Because oftentimes that can be something where once you get it out, once you hear yourself say it, it changes everything. Where if you keep it up in your head, then it's something that you're kind of trapped.
I think that's, you really touched on something important there, active listening and what that's all about and how to do that. I think sometimes I think we've hit a point where people are kind of willing to hear what's going on with their friends or their family. But sometimes what happens is in our head, we've already scripted our response. We already know what we want to say to help them out. And so instead of listening, we're more waiting. And waiting for them to get through whatever they're going to say. And then I've got the perfect thing, or I've got the perfect person. When in fact, sometimes the most useful tool is to zip it and really sit and listen and wait till the person explains absolutely everything, and leaving your judgments, positive or negative, at the door until that person gives you permission. And so one of the things that I've learned that I think is a good tool for everybody to use is if someone is starting to get into that and you find yourself scripting or you find yourself pre-planning your responses, ask the person, do I have your permission to give advice, or do you need someone to listen? And then that way the person is empowered to either take your advice and have you as a partner in that, or just to use you as a sounding board so they can work through their own idea. Oftentimes, depression and anxiety can create. I loved the guy from Fog, and how he was talking about walking through the fog, right? And sometimes a person just has to walk through it to find where the clear section is, right? And in this example, it's somebody talking it through. But if we cut them off or we provide them with too much of our own ideas, while we feel like we're empowering them, we're actually empowering ourselves.
Yeah, and they're not able to get through that fog, right? It's just they've tried to open up and share, and it's another person that's not really listened to them, right? So it's another person that they haven't been able to get through to or share what they're saying, and it's so important just to provide that active listening.
Yeah. I think for active listening, people do need to know the definition and how it's different than just hearing somebody out, right? And active listening means you are engaged, you're nodding your head, you're making eye contact, you're genuinely expressing yourself through your facial expressions and your body language. You can say so much more with that to someone who's speaking. However, when we choose to verbalize over top of, or wait our turn and then wait their turn and so on and so forth, it becomes this process of you, now me, now you, instead of a constructive conversation where somebody could ask questions, whether it be to themselves or to whomever they're talking to. And I think this is a step that I think just Joe Blow, Jane Blow out there can do today, right now. Is maybe we were talking about how we hope that the show is going to spark conversations at home, and this is one of the ways that you can really participate in that conversation. It's by offering your active listening and offering your ear rather than necessarily your response to everything. You're right, man. We're not all doctors here. We're not all therapists. And while we might have the best intention here, sometimes we haven't thought it all the way through here, and then we're spouting it out, and we might actually be doing damage instead of offering help. Now, any outreach, I believe, is good outreach. That's a great first step. And another good second step is, being part of the conversation, just like we are right here, right? And I mean, we're all hosts. We know that some of what we're saying is scripted, right? But what I've noticed is as the day has progressed, it's gotten more and more genuine, more and more organic. And that just speaks to the bigger issue, which that if we keep talking about it, it becomes more and more comfortable, more and more normalized to talk about this kind of stuff. And so people can approach mental illness and mental health crisis with confidence rather than the gamble.
Right, definitely. And I feel so inspired by everyone that's participated today. And it's really, I love what you said about when somebody starts to open up to you and you get to that point of, do you need to ask that question to yourself too? Is this person wanting me just to listen, or do they want me to provide advice? And I think you as a person could probably really, or me as a person, not you specifically, like you as a person having that conversation in your head could find out and figure out whether or not this person is actually asking for advice, or if they just need that sounding board.
Absolutely. I think another thing that people could do to, do something today to help themselves out or help out somebody that they know is really lean into what is going well for you. Rarely is it absolutely everything, and sometimes the biggest challenge is finding that one thing that you can hold on and take. But I know that there's artists out there right now listening who haven't picked up their paintbrush in a while, and I know that there's gifted speakers out there who haven't put themselves in front of a crowd in a while. I know that there's writers and rock collectors and you name it, that they've put their thing away in lieu of, well, maybe just coping with their mental health,
right,
maybe for their job or their kids or their spouse. But, kind of in the spirit of Blue Monday and what we can do to kick back, I think that's people should pick up some of these useful tools that are just available to them right now. Maybe there's someone looking at their sketch pad right now as I'm talking. And if you are looking at your sketch pad, pick it up. But, giving these permissions to speak, giving these permissions to engage in your passion, that's where we can make the real impact, and that's where we can make the real impact today, and not waiting for the specialist to come and knock in, or not waiting for the crisis where you end up in an emergency room or something like that.
Right.
But instead, you've done something preventative, and you've given yourself that first foothold in order to start climbing up. I think all three of us have experienced the bottom at some point in our life, and what that's like. And sometimes, I know at least in my experience, it was somebody just reaching out their hand and saying, I don't care about any of that. I care about you, and I care about your pictures, and I care about your job, and I care about your relationships. And then all of a sudden I realized I was worthy of care. And I think that's something that a lot of people on Blue Monday should be able to dig into, is the fact that they are worthy of that care.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Greg. But as both guest and host, we love your passion. Thank you. And we'll be right back. We're going to be joined by a couple gentlemen to delve into mental health in the LGBTQ community.
Oh, so useful.
Valentina, Lucia, Beto, Emilio,